Here is something that happens every morning in millions of kitchens, and almost nobody notices it. You make your coffee, you drink it, maybe with milk, maybe black, maybe with something sweet, and somewhere between the first cup and mid-morning, something shifts. The energy that felt clear and clean an hour after waking becomes slightly less stable. A vague heaviness arrives. Not fatigue exactly, not hunger exactly. Something between the two that sends you toward the kitchen looking for something. A biscuit, a handful of crackers, something to resolve a feeling you can't quite name. Most people blame the coffee, or blame getting older, or just accept it as part of the morning pattern and move on. But the feeling has a specific cause. It's not the coffee. It's not age in the general sense. It's something specific that's happening in your blood glucose regulation in the hours after waking. Something that accelerates after 60, that the coffee itself may be amplifying slightly, and that one specific addition to your morning cup directly and measurably addresses. Let me show you what's actually happening, and then I'll tell you what to add. Blood glucose after 60 does not behave the way it did at 42. This is not a dramatic statement. It is basic metabolic physiology. Two things shift with age that together change the morning glucose picture in ways most people experience as symptoms without knowing their source. The first is the dawn phenomenon. Between approximately 4 and 8 in the morning, the body releases a surge of counter-regulatory hormones, primarily cortisol and growth hormone, as part of the biological preparation for the transition from sleep to waking. These hormones have the effect of mobilizing glucose from glycogen stores in the liver, raising blood glucose in anticipation of the energy demands of the waking day. This is not a pathological response. It is a normal circadian mechanism that has been operating since birth. What changes after 60 is the insulin response to this dawn glucose surge. In younger adults, the pancreas responds to the rising glucose with a proportionate early-phase insulin secretion that clears the glucose effectively, before it accumulates to levels that produce metabolic stress. After 60, the first phase insulin response, the rapid burst of insulin secretion that occurs within minutes of a glucose signal, becomes slower, smaller, and less efficient. The dawn glucose surge occurs on schedule. The insulin response that should meet it is delayed and reduced. The result is a higher and more prolonged blood glucose peak in the early morning hours than the same person would have experienced 20 years earlier, from the same cortisol-driven glucose release. The second shift is insulin sensitivity itself. The cells throughout the body, muscle cells, liver cells, fat cells, become less responsive to insulin's signal to take up glucose from the bloodstream. The same amount of insulin produces less glucose clearance. The pancreas compensates by producing more insulin for a while, until that compensation also becomes less effective and blood glucose sits elevated for longer after any glucose load, including the glucose released by the liver every morning before you have eaten a single bite. This is the metabolic background against which you pour your first cup of coffee. Coffee has its own effect on blood glucose. The caffeine in coffee stimulates cortisol and adrenaline release, extending, to a modest degree, the hormonal environment of the dawn phenomenon. It mildly reduces insulin sensitivity in the short term through adrenergic signaling. For most healthy adults with intact insulin responses, this effect is modest and transient. For adults over 60 with already reduced first-phase insulin secretion and established insulin resistance, the caffeine-mediated cortisol and adrenaline pulse can amplify the morning glucose elevation meaningfully. This is not a reason to stop drinking coffee. The long-term evidence on moderate coffee consumption and metabolic health is largely positive. Multiple large prospective cohort studies show lower rates of type 2 diabetes in regular coffee drinkers compared to non-drinkers, attributed to the chlorogenic acids and polyphenols in coffee that improve insulin sensitivity over time through mechanisms independent of caffeine. The acute morning glucose effect of caffeine in the context of the dawn phenomenon is real, but it is a short-term phenomenon occurring against a long-term favorable metabolic background. The question is how to use the morning coffee ritual to address the acute morning glucose instability rather than inadvertently amplifying it. And the answer involves what you add to that cup. The ingredient is hydrolyzed collagen peptides. Most people know collagen in one context, joint health, and that context is legitimate. I covered the joint protective evidence for collagen in a previous video, but collagen's relationship with blood glucose regulation is a separate story, documented through different mechanisms, and largely unknown to the people who would benefit most from understanding it. Let me build the mechanism. Hydrolyzed collagen is collagen that has been enzymatically broken down into short chains of amino acids, peptides, that are small enough to be absorbed efficiently through the gut wall and to enter the bloodstream rapidly after consumption. The amino acid profile of collagen is unique among common dietary proteins. It is extraordinarily rich in 3 amino acids, glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline, that are present in much lower concentrations in meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. Glycine is where the blood sugar story begins. Glycine is a non-essential amino acid. The body can produce it, but it is produced in quantities that appear insufficient for optimal metabolic function, and its concentrations in the tissues of modern adults are commonly below the levels associated with ideal metabolic health. A 2009 study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition identified low plasma glycine as one of the metabolic markers most consistently associated with insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes risk, an association that has since been replicated across multiple populations and has motivated a growing body of research into glycine's specific role in glucose regulation. The mechanisms are multiple, as science shows. GLP-1 is an incretin hormone. It is released in response to food in the intestine, and its primary effect is to stimulate glucose-dependent insulin secretion from the pancreatic beta cells. Critically, it stimulates insulin secretion only when blood glucose is elevated. It has no effect on insulin secretion at normal or low blood glucose concentrations, which means it drives insulin release when it is needed without risk of producing hypoglycemia when it is not. GLP-1 is also the biological target of semaglutide, the active compound in widely discussed diabetes and weight management medications, and the entire class of GLP-1 receptor agonist drugs. The pharmaceutical approach delivers a synthetic GLP-1 receptor stimulus. Dietary glycine from collagen stimulates the body's own GLP-1 release at the intestinal level through a natural endocrine pathway. The magnitudes are different. Pharmacological GLP-1 receptor agonism produces a far stronger effect than dietary glycine-stimulated GLP-1 secretion, but the direction is the same, through a mechanism that works specifically in the glucose-elevated state where it is most needed. A 2017 study published in Diabetes Care examined the effect of glycine supplementation on postprandial glycemic response in adults with type 2 diabetes. Participants who received glycine before a glucose challenge showed significantly lower peak blood glucose and lower glucose area under the curve compared to placebo, with the effect attributed to the GLP-1 mediated enhancement of insulin secretion and to glycine's direct effects on glucagon suppression. The blood glucose stabilization from glycine was measurable within 30 to 60 minutes of consumption, a timeline that aligns directly with the morning coffee window. Beyond GLP-1, glycine has direct effects on insulin sensitivity at the cellular level. It acts as a co-agonist at NMDA receptors in peripheral tissues, a receptor type involved in insulin signal transduction, and it upregulates the expression of GLUT4 glucose transporters in muscle cells, increasing the capacity of muscle tissue to take up glucose from the bloodstream in response to insulin. A 2016 study in PLOS ONE found that glycine supplementation for 3 months in adults with metabolic syndrome significantly improved fasting glucose, fasting insulin, and insulin sensitivity indices compared to placebo, a comprehensive metabolic improvement that the researchers attributed to the combined GLP-1 and cellular insulin sensitization mechanisms. Glycine also reduces the inflammatory activation of adipose tissue that contributes to insulin resistance. It inhibits NF-κB activation in fat cells, the same inflammatory master switch I have described in multiple previous contexts, reducing the production of adipokines and inflammatory cytokines that impair insulin receptor signaling in muscle and liver tissue. This anti-inflammatory effect on adipose tissue is relevant specifically to the visceral fat-associated insulin resistance that is disproportionately prevalent in adults over 60. How collagen delivers glycine to the morning coffee window. 1 tablespoon of hydrolyzed collagen peptides, approximately 10 grams by weight, delivers approximately 2.7 grams of glycine, along with meaningful amounts of proline and hydroxyproline. It dissolves completely in hot liquids. It does not alter the flavor of coffee in most people's assessment at this dose. It does not curdle in hot coffee the way many dairy proteins do, and it is absorbed rapidly. Hydrolyzed peptides cross the intestinal wall faster than intact protein, reaching the circulation within 30 to 60 minutes of consumption. The timing matters. Adding collagen to the first cup of coffee, the cup consumed within the first hour of waking, when the dawn phenomenon glucose elevation is active, and when the cortisol from the caffeine is adding to the morning hormonal glucose load, places the glycine GLP-1 stimulus exactly where it is most needed. The incretin response from the glycine acts on the same glucose-elevated morning milieu that the combination of the dawn phenomenon and caffeine is producing, stimulating the enhanced insulin secretion that the aging beta cell is less reliably providing on its own. The result, documented in the studies I described, is a lower and more stable blood glucose through the morning, reducing the glucose variability that produces the mid-morning energy instability, the cravings, and the cognitive cloudiness that many adults over 60 experience as a feature of morning hours without understanding its metabolic source. This is also why collagen-added coffee tends to delay hunger more effectively than black coffee. Part of the appetite-suppressing effect of GLP-1, the mechanism through which GLP-1 receptor agonist medications produce weight reduction, is slowed gastric emptying and increased satiety signaling to the hypothalamus. Dietary glycine-stimulated GLP-1, at the lower physiological concentrations produced by food rather than pharmacology, produces a modest but real increase in gastric emptying time and a mild enhancement of satiety signaling that extends the comfortable period without hunger into the mid-morning. The fullness that follows collagen-added coffee lasts longer than the fullness from black coffee alone, and it reduces the probability of the impulsive mid-morning snack that represents, for many people, the largest source of unintended refined carbohydrate consumption in the day. The practical details, because getting them right makes the difference between benefit and disappointment. Product selection. Not all collagen peptide products are equal in their glycine content or their purity. The collagen type most commonly available and most relevant to the glycine delivery I have described is bovine collagen, derived from cowhide or bones, or marine collagen, derived from fish skin. Both are hydrolyzed into peptides of similar size and are absorbed with comparable efficiency. Bovine collagen tends to have slightly higher glycine content per gram. Marine collagen has a marginally better amino acid profile for some applications, but is not meaningfully superior for the blood glucose mechanism specifically. Look for products with third-party testing for heavy metals. Collagen is derived from animal tissue and can accumulate environmental contaminants if sourcing and testing are inadequate. Reputable products will display a certificate of analysis from an independent laboratory. NSF certification or informed sport certification are the most rigorous independent standards to look for on the label. Dose: 1 to 2 tablespoons, 10 to 20 grams, is the range used in the positive clinical research. 1 tablespoon daily is a practical starting point. 2 tablespoons produces a more robust glycine delivery and is appropriate for adults with established prediabetes or metabolic syndrome where the blood glucose regulation benefit is most urgently needed. Above 20 grams per serving, collagen becomes a meaningful protein source that may alter the character of the morning coffee from a drink to something closer to a meal, which may or may not align with your morning routine preferences. Temperature. Hydrolyzed collagen peptides dissolve readily in hot coffee at any standard brewing temperature. They do not require mixing at high speed. A thorough stir with a spoon is adequate. If you prefer cold coffee or iced preparations, collagen peptides dissolve in cold liquid with slightly more agitation. A brief shake or blender pulse resolves any clumping. Timing relative to eating. Adding collagen to the coffee consumed before breakfast, in a fasted or semi-fasted state, produces the maximal GLP-1 stimulus relative to the morning glucose load. Because the glycine arrives in the intestine when glucose is rising from the dawn phenomenon without any competing macronutrient load, slowing or diluting the enteroendocrine response. If you typically eat breakfast immediately with your coffee, the collagen benefit is still present, but the mechanistic context is slightly different. The glycine's GLP-1 stimulus now overlaps with the glucose load from breakfast, which is also a valid and beneficial context. What to avoid adding simultaneously? High amounts of added sugar to the collagen coffee. The metabolic contradiction of adding glycine to stimulate GLP-1 mediated insulin sensitivity while simultaneously delivering a sugar load that drives insulin resistance is not a theoretical concern. It is a real offset that reduces the net benefit of the glycine intervention. A plain collagen-added black coffee, or one with a small amount of full-fat milk, or a plant-based alternative without added sugar, maintains the favorable metabolic context. A collagen-added coffee sweetened with 2 sachets of table sugar counteracts a meaningful portion of what the collagen is doing. 3 additional components worth knowing about. Chromium. Chromium is a trace mineral that serves as a cofactor for insulin receptor signaling. It enhances the binding of insulin to its receptor and improves the downstream signaling cascade through which insulin drives glucose uptake in muscle cells. Chromium deficiency impairs insulin sensitivity. Adequate chromium supports it. Coffee itself depletes chromium through increased urinary excretion, a mechanism documented in the nutrition literature as one of the reasons heavy coffee consumption may impair glucose regulation in some people, despite coffee's otherwise favorable metabolic effects. Adding a small amount of chromium-rich cinnamon to the collagen coffee simultaneously addresses this chromium depletion effect and adds the COX-inhibiting anti-inflammatory mechanism I described in the cardiovascular coffee script. Magnesium. As I described in the oats and blood pressure video, magnesium deficiency is associated with insulin resistance through the calcium channel antagonism and insulin signal transduction mechanisms. A pinch of food-grade magnesium glycinate powder, or simply ensuring that the breakfast that follows the coffee is magnesium-rich, compounds the blood glucose stabilizing effect of the glycine through a parallel and complementary mechanism. Protein at breakfast, the GLP-1 stimulus from collagen peptides in the morning coffee, is most effective when followed by a breakfast that does not immediately respike blood glucose. A breakfast anchored by protein and healthy fat, eggs, plain Greek yogurt, nuts, smoked salmon, maintains the metabolic stability that the morning coffee with collagen establishes. A breakfast of refined carbohydrates, toast, sweetened cereal, pastry, undoes it. For adults with diagnosed kidney disease, protein intake, including protein from collagen, requires physician guidance regarding total daily load. Hydrolyzed collagen at 1 tablespoon per day is a modest protein addition for most people with early kidney disease, but the total dietary protein context should be discussed with the physician managing kidney function. Here is who should be careful with this approach. For adults taking medications for diabetes, particularly insulin or insulin secretagogues like sulfonylureas, the blood glucose lowering effect of regular collagen consumption is real and should be monitored. If fasting or post-meal glucose begins running lower than previously observed, the physician managing the diabetes should be informed so that medication adjustments can be considered. This is a favorable outcome, blood glucose improving because the dietary approach is working, but it requires clinical awareness and potential medication recalibration. The morning matters more than any other meal for blood glucose regulation after 60. It is the meal window that follows the longest fast of the day. It coincides with the dawn phenomenon, glucose elevation. It includes the cortisol and adrenaline of the waking transition. And for adults with reduced first-phase insulin response and established insulin resistance, it is the window during which blood glucose is most likely to run elevated and most likely to set the tone for the metabolic stability or instability of the rest of the day. What you add to your morning coffee is not a trivial decision. It is a direct input into a biological system that is already under age-related stress at the precise time of day when that stress is at its daily maximum. 1 tablespoon of hydrolyzed collagen peptides dissolved in your first cup of coffee, every morning, consistently, provides the glycine that stimulates the GLP-1 response your aging beta cells need support generating. The incretin-mediated insulin enhancement that smooths the morning glucose peak, and the extended satiety that reduces the probability of the mid-morning snacking that undermines the rest of the day's metabolic picture. It does not taste like anything you would notice. It requires 30 seconds of stirring. And the biology of what it does in the first hour after your coffee is more directly targeted to the specific metabolic challenge of blood glucose after 60 than almost anything else you could add to that cup. That is the addition. That is the mechanism. That is the evidence. If this explains something you have been experiencing, the mid-morning heaviness, the cravings that arrive before you expect them, the sense that the morning is metabolically less stable than it used to be, and gave you a specific practical response to it, hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second and tells this platform that precise, mechanism-based metabolic health information for adults over 60 deserves a consistent audience. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Every week, there is one video here that goes this deep, from the experience to the biology to the specific, actionable morning habit that addresses it. Leave me a comment with this. Do you currently notice any mid-morning energy dip or cravings, roughly 2 to 3 hours after your first coffee? And does it happen whether or not you eat breakfast? That pattern tells me something specific about where your morning glucose regulation is breaking down. Write it below. I read every comment and I respond when I can.